Hi, hello, my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I want to start with saying I'm sorry I haven't been doing any voice recorded videos for a little bit. I got really busy, and then I got really sick, and I'm still a little bit sick, so my voice might sound a little bit off. But welcome back to the people who are returning, and for those of you that are new here, hi, I'm Sky. I draw and I talk about stuff usually pertaining to art, media, and or queer topics. Sit back, have a listen, and if you feel like hitting the subscribe button, that would be super cool of you. Today's topic is fine. I'll talk about J.K. Rowling. Because I really didn't want to talk about this at all, but on some other platforms, people expect me to have an opinion because I am trans and therefore, at least on some level, affected. Um, But the thing is, some people are probably not gonna like my opinion because it has nuance, and I'm not just jumping on a train of hating on something like it seems to be popular to do. Now, don't get it twisted. This is not gonna be a video that says JKR is good, actually. No, honestly, at this point, as a person, she can jump off a cliff without a broomstick. But her creative work still holds value to me personally. And I know there are people who've been chanting, read another book for like 2 decades. And that's fine. Not liking Harry Potter is fine. Addressing the, dubiousness of building an entire personality around a fictional book series is fine. The reason I'm talking about it is more to give voice to an opinion that I think is maybe less commonly voiced for people who, have a special place in their hearts for Harry Potter, but who still might be queer, who in general just abhor what J.K. Rowling has said and done with the power that this piece of work that she made has given her. And also so that when people expect me to have a quick, snappy opinion, I can link them this video, because that's as close as I'm gonna get, and I really just only want to discuss this one time, because for me, it's painful, I don't like talking about transphobia, and I don't like that an author whose work is so fundamental to my childhood has just these very nasty, hurtful, quote-unquote, opinions about, my existence. But to get into the actual video and get started, I just want to talk a little bit first about why Harry Potter hit just right for so many kids and teens when it first came out. Harry Potter is first and foremost about a boy who doesn't fit in, who's bullied at school, whose family treats him poorly, and that's already relatable to a lot of kids. But then someone shows up and tells him, you're magic, actually, and you're really well known in this magical community of super eccentric people, and everyone loves you, which is just fucking indulgent escapism to a kid, and, that's what we wanted. And yeah, then bad things happen, but Harry's the hero. It has to go right for him in the end. He can solve problems that the grown-ups refuse to address, goes on adventures. It's all great. And then, as the kids reading these books grow older, Harry grows with them, and so does the tone of the books. And that's not to say that there isn't a problem with the massive consumerism side of Harry Potter as a fandom, or that the writing is flawless, that's not the point. This is just kind of setting the stage for how I felt about it as a kid, and how a lot of kids, a lot of queer and neurodivergent kids especially, felt about these books. And why a little bit, this massive community sprung up around these books the way that it did. A community that ultimately has affected tons of people over the course of our lives through art, fanfic, even roleplay and shipping have been a huge part of a community that's formed around this. There are fanfics. There are fanfictions out there longer than the actual books that are just as, and sometimes even more well written than the source material. And then there's your truly terrible Draco X Apple content and ships that I won't acknowledge here, lest I start an early 2000s style flame war. We're not going there. And I'm gonna take this opportunity to say, hey, discussion, welcome, open. Keep the comments civil, and I probably personally won't be getting into discussion in the comments just because the whole point of this is so I don't have to talk about it again. But I'm not going to discourage other people from talking about it, and if you want to talk about, my artwork or, how you feel about Harry Potter and how you're choosing to handle it in the comment section, that's totally fine. Just keep it civil. But anyways, yeah, so that's kind of where, this cultural phenomena sprung around these books to the point where there's whole musicals based on them. Parody musicals, but musicals nonetheless. And yeah, some of us have felt the creeping hands of corporate soullessness for a while, and still more of us have, in response to that, clung desperately to the smaller communities that we built. And, just remember the absolute, unquestionable nerdy delight of finding someone on the school bus or on the playground in an era before internet and cell phones and, things like Tumblr and fandom culture were as widespread as they are now. And seeing that person's eyes light up when you mention Harry Potter, and you know instantly, just from that you've made a new friend. So I just wanted to go and talk about all of that and explain what it felt like to be a Harry Potter fan back in the day, because I feel like that plays really heavily into how hurt people feel and the culture around Harry Potter now, and it definitely plays into my opinion and how I've chosen to handle Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling as general subjects going forward. And if you hear some crunching in the background, that is my cat, who decided that right now was a great time to have a snack. So enjoy the kitty cat ASMR, I guess. But to cycle back around to J.K. Rowling, and, why haven't I mentioned her yet? For me, she wasn't really a part of the Harry Potter experience. I think the most impact she had on me personally when I was younger was at some point I read an article about how when she was writing the third book, she was really, really depressed, and that's how she came up with Dementors. And that's it. That's the biggest impact that she had on me as a person, and her direct involvement ended there for me. And I feel like for a lot of us, that's how it was. Just because, authors didn't used to be so involved as they can be now when fandoms were coming up. Just because that connection wasn't always there. And that has its benefits and downsides, as we've seen multiple times. So, yeah, I just kind of wanted to go over where I'm personally coming from and where I feel like a lot of fans who feel caught in the middle like this are coming from. I feel like I don't really need to go into all of JKR's sins at this point. Those have been covered at length by a great many channels. I feel like if I was gonna throw out a recommendation, Jessie Gender has a couple different videos that she made as the JKR situation was evolving. I feel like if I was going to sit down and watch JKR video, I would prefer to listen to Jessie's take, just because she handles things, especially subjects like transphobia, really gracefully, I think. So yeah, with that said, to make a very long story short, JKR did a transphobia, got called out, proceeded to double down harder every single time her fans tried desperately to pull her ass out of the fire and believe that this wasn't happening. And while that was happening, I feel like at first, right at the beginning when it was starting to become a known thing, there was really only a small response within the fandom because people were like, okay, author did a bad thing. But remember, I love you and we love each other. And, this is about the books and the community that we've made. Authors show their asses all the time. But then it just kept getting worse, and for some people it felt distant because the author was never a part of their experience, and for some people it was a fresh wound, a new source of trauma because it felt like someone who in some ways had been with you since childhood, like a family member had done these things. And for a lot of us, our family members do say and do the really crappy things that J.K. Rowling does, just with a lot less power to act on it and do harm with it. And like, however you reacted, when it sank in for you that J.K. Rowling is undeniably a transphobe and does not care about us, that's a valid reaction. Like, especially if you are trans yourself. None of this video is me saying that my reaction is right and any other reaction is wrong. So much as hashing out my own feelings and some of the behaviors that have cropped up that I'm not a fan of when it comes to reacting to this. Because some of the reactions from fans or just like general media critics who are aware that the downfall of Harry Potter is going to get clicks, which like, I'm less fond of that, but also, hey, you're a creator, get that dough. But I feel like some of those reactions have really pushed, to be redundant, reactionary bounds, and they've left a bad taste in my mouth. Like, one thing that I'm really not fond of is the trope that seems to have sprung up almost of dissecting every microaggression in Harry Potter as proof she hated us all along. And yes, it's important to break down negative tropes that our favorite media plays into, especially in Harry Potter when it comes to some of the anti-Arab or anti-Semitic tropes that the books have. And that has its place in discussion of media, even our favorite media, especially our favorite media. But specifically framing things like describing Rita Skeeter's hands as mannish and Snape in a dress framed as something to laugh at, as definite proof that J.K. Rowling's transphobic values were transparent from the start and that we have all been willfully ignorant since we were children, is, it's a take. It's a take. And again, I'm not defending the use of those harmful tropes, but I do think it's disingenuous to look at something that was commonplace in widespread media in the 90s and early 2000s and attribute that to blatant and obvious malicious intent from the start that literal children were just too stupid to see, and that we should feel bad for missing and like not noticing tropes like that being used. Because when you take a second and you think about what I've described, and you tell me you would have even known the word transphobic to call it out in 1999 when Prisoner of Azkaban was written and Snape wore a dress. With I'm sure some limited exceptions, most of us just weren't educated in a way to have those conversations yet at that point. And again, the tropes themselves, bad. Addressing them, good. Acting like the tropes were obvious, transparent evidence of malicious intent from the start, bad take. Reframe your thinking. There are better ways to address this. Let's try again. But then also, when it comes to reactions to the J.K. Rowling situation, running to the opposite end, there's a huge number of people who proudly continue to wear their Harry Potter gear, who spend money on licensed Harry Potter merch that goes directly to J.K. Rowling's wallet, and by extension, to hurting trans people, because she financially supports things that hurt trans people, and she's, I guess, involved in legislation. Again, I try not to look into it. I really try not to hurt myself by doing that. Um, but there's people who just refuse to acknowledge that the situation exists, and a lot of those people are cis. And as far as why they have chosen to refuse to acknowledge it at all is, cis people feeling who, as cis people, they don't have a say. Which, y'all, I promise, you're not crossing any boundaries. It's okay to say transphobia, bad. Uh, very few people are gonna get on your case for that, and the ones that do, maybe they're not the good ones. Um, but other reasons are that I've heard from cis people are, they still feel love for the series and they want to separate that from the author, which is fair, but like buy fan merch on Etsy instead of licensed stuff. Like that's a really solid way to kind of balance, like, well, I still want to spend money on Harry Potter stuff because it makes the feel good happen, but not giving that money to J.K. Rowling and transphobia. Um, I feel a lot more at peace with that than when I know that the money isn't going into Joanne's pockets. And then, the last reason that I've heard from people is, why should I care? It doesn't affect me. And the thing with that last one is, it might not affect you directly, but it affects the people around you. We, as trans people, as queer people, who are hurt by JKR and what she's done and said, and who in some cases have had our livelihoods threatened and our lives threatened because of the steps that she's taken and the things that she's encouraged. We don't know which reaction of those or the plethora of others that are possible someone's having when they're, repping their Harry Potter gear in public. And that realization was what knocked me away from continuing to publicly be a Harry Potter fan, basically. That was the nail in the coffin that had me, throwing out and getting rid of almost all of my merch. I kept a few things. Kept a tank top that I sleep in, and I sometimes wear it to the gym if I don't have any of my other gym clothes clean. I've got a Slytherin scarf that I spent way too much money on at Universal on my 21st birthday. I've got a Slytherin cloak, which, same reason, and also, I don't know, maybe someday I'll still cosplay, but also cosplay is so far from my list of priorities right now anyways. And then I've got a hoodie that is just way too comfortable to get rid of, so now it lives in my car as an emergency jacket. But I used to have tons of merch. Like, half my wardrobe was Harry Potter stuff because I was that guy. But I've since thrown most of it out or, gotten rid of it in some capacity or another because I can't justify the potential to make other queer people feel unsafe by wearing it. And that's ultimately what happens because we don't know if you're wearing it because you support J.K. Rowling and you support, hating on trans people, or if you're wearing it because you just don't care, or if you're wearing it because you have the same complicated feelings on Harry Potter that we do. Or we might, I guess. So yeah, that's really the first part of my response is I no longer would even think about doing things like loudly proclaiming myself a Slytherin on my social media profiles. I'm hesitant to make Harry Potter merch for my Etsy store that isn't also explicitly anti-JKR or explicitly pro-trans. And I probably just won't make it to avoid the whole thing. And just in general, dialing it back as far as publicly saying, yes, I like Harry Potter. But, but, that isn't the beginning and end of how I'm handling Harry Potter either. Because I have up to this point been a very vocal and active, fan. I've been in fan spaces. And those aren't, the friends that I've made there aren't people I want to abandon. Those aren't spaces that I want to just abandon. So I'm still going to talk about Harry Potter with my friends. I'm still going to read fanfic. I'm still going to be active in those communities. Like, I'm not going to tell you where, because they're generally very small and secular, but, I'm still going to be there. So it's twofold, because JKR is bad. And at this point, I don't know if anything but a full 180 into, like, hardcore trans rights activism could ever even kind of redeem her for me. But Harry Potter is still a thing that has made me smile for more years of my life than I have known who J.K. Rowling actually was. She can't take that away from me. She can't take the meaning of my tattoo that I got when I was 20 years old away from me. And I'm not going to let her, even if I'm no longer going to advertise that part of my life or my interests the way that I have thrown myself into with some other things. And you're getting a little more kitty ASMR because someone has decided scratching at the carpet is a good idea. But yeah, I just... doing so, advertising that I love Harry Potter and that it was a huge formative part of my life, it doesn't serve the purpose that it used to for me, is really the main thing. It's not going to help me find like-minded people to have cool conversations with, really, now. At best, it's going to get me into conversations with people whose motives and views I have to, guess at and question. Or at worst, it'll fully alienate people and make them feel potentially unsafe around me. Because they can't guess my motives. But I can still reread the books all I want. I can still rewatch the movies and, have my yearly Christmas time Harry Potter movie marathon and not feel guilty about it and enjoy doing that. Because it isn't putting money in JKR's pockets, and it doesn't hurt anyone else or, make other people feel unsafe. I can keep supporting fan artists and fan writers that I trust and adore, and for whom this little boy who lived in a cupboard brought just as much unity and joy to as he did me. It's a balancing act, and yeah, for me, it's one that involves not feeding the trolls, as we used to say, and not making the story about Rowling. The story, for me, is always going to be about Harry and how he affected my life and the lives of other people like me, especially other queer people like me. So, yeah, now you guys kind of know my thoughts on the whole Harry Potter J.K. Rowling situation and how I'm personally choosing to handle it as someone who has for a long time been a fan of Harry Potter. And hopefully I never have to talk about it again. And then just a little bit about the art that you've been seeing in the background here. This was a speed paint piece that I did as a trade. I will be linking the person it was for on Twitter in the comments section because her work is amazing and you should absolutely go check her out. And then I promised my patrons that I would start doing verbal patron shoutouts in these videos. So I just want to say a huge thank you to, as I probably butcher all of your names, Brooke Dufresne, Chameleon, Guts and Gaze, Tess Frost, Spirit of Stars, Ki Hiramaru, Arisark, Miles Mentis, Kara Name, Jordan Kirian, and Planchel. You guys are super awesome. And then a huge thank you to everyone who made it to the end of this video. You are amazing and I adore you. And if you didn't make it to the end, you're not hearing this, but I adore you anyways. I'll see you guys next time.